7 years ago, something happened that shattered the way I see the world. I've never told anyone about it because, honestly, who would believe me? But this story has been stuck in my mind like a splinter, festering, and maybe telling about it here will help me. Or maybe it won't. It was a cold night after a grueling shift at the restaurant where I worked. Midnight was approaching, and I was desperate to get home. To save time, I took a shortcut through an old park that no one used anymore. The place was straight out of a horror movie: twisted trees, rusted benches, and flickering streetlights casting jittery shadows. I hated that park, but that night, I just wanted to get home. As I walked, I noticed something unsettling. The sound of my footsteps wasn't alone. There was another sound, faint but distinct, like someone trying to match my pace, step for step. I stopped and turned, scanning the empty pathway. Nothing. Just the faint glow of the streetlights and shadows dancing at the edges of my vision. I told myself it was my imagination and started walking again, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, heavier, as if someone, or something, was running toward me. My heart raced as I spun around, expecting to see a drunk or maybe a stray animal. There was no one there. Just silence. The air felt colder, heavier. I quickened my pace, beads of sweat forming on the back of my neck despite the chill. That's when it happened. The nearest streetlight flickered, and for a split second I saw it. Standing directly ahead, in the middle of the path, was a man. He was unnaturally tall and thin, his arms hanging limply at his sides like a broken doll. His head tilted slightly, as if studying me. But his face, there was no face. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a blank expanse of pale, smooth skin, stretched tight like a mask. I froze. He didn't move, but his presence felt like a scream in my ears. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I took a step back, and as if mocking me, he took a step forward. The light flickered again, and when it came back, he was closer. I ran. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I could hear his steps behind me now, matching my speed, getting closer. I didn't dare look back. The fear was too much. If I saw him again, I felt like my mind would snap. The park exit came into view, the street light at the gate glowing steadily like a beacon of safety. I pushed myself harder, legs trembling, heart pounding. The moment I crossed the threshold, the footsteps stopped. I turned, gasping for air, expecting to see him standing there in the shadows. But the path behind me was empty. Silent. I stumbled into my apartment that night, locking every door and window. I sat on the couch with the lights on, waiting for the sun to rise. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every gust of wind sent a surge of terror through me. But the worst part wasn't over. A few nights later, I took a different route home, avoiding the park entirely. When I reached my apartment door, I noticed something lying on the floor. An envelope. No name, no address, just an unmarked envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was him. The faceless man, standing outside my building, staring directly at my window. I left that apartment the next day, abandoning most of my belongings. I didn't care. I moved across the city, far away, but the fear never left me. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of movement in the shadows, hear faint footsteps behind me when I'm walking alone. And sometimes, late at night, I feel like I'm being watched. 6 years ago, I rented a small, run-down apartment in a forgotten corner of the city. The building was old, with peeling wallpaper, uneven floors, and a constant draft no matter how many windows you closed. But it was cheap, and I was broke, so I took it without hesitation. If I'd known what was waiting for me inside, I would have slept in my car instead. The apartment had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that barely fit a couch. It also had a door. Not the front door, or the bathroom door, but a strange one in the bedroom that led nowhere. Behind it was a shallow closet, empty except for a single nail hammered into the wall. The landlord called it an old storage space, and told me not to worry about it. The first night was quiet, mostly. I unpacked, set up my laptop, and settled into my new routine. At some point, I realized the door to the strange closet was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open, but I assumed the draft had moved it and closed it again. That night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to the sound of whispering. Faint, unintelligible murmurs, like a dozen voices overlapping. Groggy and annoyed, I thought maybe the sound was coming from outside, but when I strained my ears, I realized it wasn't. It was coming from the closet. The whispers were soft at first, almost rhythmic. They seemed to swirl in the air, growing louder as I approached the door. My heart was pounding, but I opened it anyway. The closet was empty, just like before. No voices, no movement, nothing. I closed the door, locked it with the tiny latch on the frame, and went back to bed, telling myself it was my imagination. But the whispers didn't stop. Every night, at the exact same time, they came back. Faint at first, then louder, until it felt like the entire room was filled with them. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I knew, deep down, that they weren't friendly. There was something malevolent in their tone, something that made my stomach churn and my skin crawl. I tried everything to stop it. I sealed the edges of the door with tape, shoved furniture in front of it, even put headphones on to drown out the sound. Nothing worked. The whispers always found me. One night, I finally snapped. I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar, determined to tear the closet apart and find the source of the noise. As the whispers grew louder, I swung the crowbar at the wall, breaking through the brittle plaster. Behind it was another room. It was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, and covered in the same peeling wallpaper as the rest of the apartment. But the air inside was thick, heavy, and it reeked of something foul, like rotting meat and mildew. My flashlight flickered as I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. Words. Carved into every inch of the walls. Don't open the door. Don't let them in. Don't look at their faces. The flashlight flickered again, and the whispers turned into screams. Deafening, inhuman screams that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I dropped the flashlight and turned to run, but the closet door slammed shut behind me. I don't remember how long I was in there. Minutes? Hours? When I finally managed to force the door open, the apartment was silent again. The whispers were gone, but I wasn't alone. There was something in the corner of the room. A figure crouched low, its limbs impossibly long, its face wrong. The skin was stretched too tight, the eyes sunken in black, the mouth curled into a grotesque grin. It didn't move. It just stared at me, unblinking. I don't remember grabbing my keys or running out the door, but I left that apartment that night and never went back. I didn't even bother asking for my deposit back. Whatever was in that room can keep it. To this day, I still have nightmares. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I swear I hear those whispers again. And when I do, I don't dare look at my closet, because I know I left something behind. Or maybe, it followed me. I've spent years trying to forget what happened that night, but some memories refuse to fade. They linger in the corners of your mind, like shadows that stretch too far, waiting for the right moment to remind you that they're still there. This is one of those memories, a story I've never shared, partly because I can barely believe it myself. It happened 8 years ago, in the house I rented after moving to a new city for work. The place was old, cheap, and had that unmistakable musty smell of wood that's been wet one too many times. I didn't mind it at first. It was all I could afford, and I wasn't planning on staying long. From the start, something felt off. The house was always colder than it should have been, even in the summer. The lights would flicker occasionally, and the mirrors in the bathroom and bedroom always seemed just a bit too dark, like they absorbed more light than they reflected. But I shrugged it off as my imagination. I had a lot on my mind, New job, new city, new stress. Then came that night. I just finished a long shift and came home exhausted. After dinner, I took a shower, letting the hot water wash away the day. The bathroom was small, with an old, rectangular mirror above the sink. It was the kind of mirror that looked warped around the edges, like it had seen too many years and too many faces. As I wiped the fog from the glass, I froze. For a moment, I thought I saw something move behind me. Not just a flicker or a trick of the light, something solid. Something there. I spun around, heart hammering, but the bathroom was empty. The shower curtain was still half open, the towel rack untouched. Just me, alone. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was just the steam messing with my eyes. I turned back to the mirror, and that's when I saw it again. This time, it wasn't just a movement. It was a shadow, standing in the corner of the reflection, near the door. It didn't have a face or any real features, but its outline was unmistakably human. My breath caught in my throat, and I whipped around again, expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. But when I turned back to the mirror, the shadow was closer. It was now standing directly behind me. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the towel rack. My mind raced for an explanation, any explanation, but nothing made sense. I grabbed my phone and ran out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial, but I called a friend and begged them to come over. I didn't care how late it was, I just didn't want to be alone. When my friend arrived, I tried to explain what I'd seen, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They joked that I was probably just tired or stressed out. Still, they stayed with me that night, and I felt a little safer having someone else there. But the worst part came the next morning. I woke up early, still shaken but trying to convince myself it was all in my head. As I went to brush my teeth, I hesitated in front of the bathroom door. The room felt wrong, like the air was heavier inside. When I finally opened the door, everything looked normal, except for the mirror. There was a handprint on the glass. It wasn't mine. The fingers were too long, the shape slightly distorted, like whoever, or whatever, left it wasn't entirely human. I moved out of that house the same week. I didn't care about breaking the lease or losing my deposit, I just wanted to get as far away as possible. Since then, I've avoided mirrors whenever I can. I know it sounds ridiculous, but every time I look into one for too long, I start to feel that same cold dread creeping over me, like something's watching, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see shadows moving in the corners of my reflection. If you ever feel like something's staring back at you from a mirror, don't look too closely. You might not like what you find.